Thank you so much for being with us this lunchtime, and for, I know at the moment Secretary of State for this topic is speaking to the hall, so it's real dedication for people who've turned him off and made it to this fringe, so we're grateful to you for that. And we've got the specialists and the experts in, I'm sure, for that reason. I'm Christian, I'm the Director of the Centre for Social Justice, and we've got some exciting fringes on during this season, but I think what we are dealing with today and what we're coming to discuss today is one of the most important topics we're covering, which is, of course, welfare, skills, and the spotlight particularly today is the work programme. What we'll do is hear from our three panellists and then want to open up to all of you who may want to offer comments, reflections, or ask questions, and then we can have a good discussion, and we'll finish by about 1:30, I think, so that we can all get on with the rest of the day. An excellent panel. We're delighted to have Harriet Baldwin here, the Parliamentary Private Secretary to Mark Coburn, of course Minister at the Department for Work and Pensions, and a long-standing member over the years of the Work and Pensions Select Committee. Harriet, thanks for coming. I know you had to really leave Ian's speech to be here, so we're really grateful for that. I hope that doesn't cost you. If we saw you walking out, we will vouch for you.
Yeah.
It's so terrible you left. Yeah, we'll tell him what you were doing. But thank you for your time here today, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Stuart from Avanta, the chairman of Avanta, thank you so much, Stuart, for working with us during this conference season. We've really enjoyed hearing about the work that's going on at Avanta, engagement with the programme and the broader things you're doing. And I was on the panel last week in Brighton with the Avanta Labour Conference, and had some excellent speakers during that session, and thought it was really refreshing to hear, particularly the work you were doing, I think, on helping people to go it alone, looking at self-employment, some of the innovation that comes through Avanta, so I think that was to be commended. Look forward to hearing from you. And Rob Devlin, the Community Resource Manager from the Cooperative Group, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited by what you're going to have to say. I've heard some good things.
No pressure.
Yes, no pressure at all. So, we are here to look at, of course, one of the most controversial areas of social policy out there at the moment, which is, of course, welfare reform. I think there's a great deal of cross-party consensus on the need for some kind of welfare reform. I think previous government started in motion a lot of the things that this government has tried to take on, whether it is welfare to work programmes, whether it is a simplification of the benefit system, which happened through universal credit. So the cross-party consensus on actually even the principles behind all of this government's welfare reforms, I think is pretty clear. But of course, the controversial nature of this gets down to the detail and what is happening, how they're looking to reduce budgets and get behind people who want to get to work, and how you straddle those two objectives. Today, of course, we're looking at the work programme. We've had recent figures out about the efficacy of the work programme, and a lot of spotlight, of course, been shone on it over the last year and a half, and of course as it was built and designed too. So we couldn't have picked a more, I think, relevant topic to be looking at today, and I would like initially, I think, to ask Harriet to kick us off with a view from government on welfare and the work programme. So please welcome Harriet, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I think one of the advantages of being a PPS is that you do get a front row seat, and being in the DWP, being at the front row seat of a department that is really putting in place a revolution in terms of welfare reform is absolutely fascinating. And today we're going to be talking about the work programme and skills specifically. But it's worth summarising, because I don't know the level of expertise in the audience in terms of some of these issues. The background, which is essentially that the government believes that the best way to help people to prosperity and out of poverty over the long term, and really the only way, is to help them and support them into work. And there are a record number of people in work in the UK at the moment. I think with a 71.6% employment rate in the UK, we have one of the highest employment rates in the developed world. And it's been one of the surprises, I think, of this whole slowdown, how the labour market has performed better than I think many people had expected, largely because where you have a skilled workforce, firms who went into this turned down with quite a good balance sheet have tended to want to keep on that skilled labour force. And of course you've got people now working longer, we've abolished the retirement age and so on. So a record number of people in work. And then a number of different reforms that are going on to try and tackle the absurdity of a safety net in our welfare system that actually sent out the message to someone that if you move into employment, you're actually going to be worse off. And that full change, obviously not completely implemented yet, but many elements of it are in the process of being implemented. So, for example, the 1.5 million people who were on incapacity benefit, going through a process with them of saying, look, we don't just want to ignore you and leave you in a position where you will at best be living close to the poverty line for the rest of your life. We want to see whether there is a way we can work with you and help you to move into a job that may be more appropriate to your physical condition in the case of people who are not able to do heavy work. But let's work with you to see what we can do to help you into work. Of those 1.5 million people, the assessments started back in April 2011, and about 70% of those people are either being helped into work at the moment through the work programme or have found work. And so you have a situation where we have seen the job seeker allowance numbers going down at a time when actually you would think that there might have been quite a strong risk of more people finding themselves on job seekers allowance because of that process. And in that process, obviously tackling some people who are very, very far from the labour market. And I think I heard a statistic yesterday from Kirsty McHugh from URSA, who's sitting in the second row, that 25% of people in the work programme have been actually out of work for more than 11 years.
ESA.
Was that
ESA.
Yeah, ESA.
Yeah.
So people who have real distance to the labour market, and people with a real gap in terms of literacy skills, numeracy skills, ability to speak English sometimes as well. And so the various different programmes that have been put in place to help address that skills, obviously very different by work programme provider. One of the key differences of the work programme from other programmes is that it's a black box. It's for providers to decide what they do. They've got a lot of flexibility. And of course, importantly, they only get paid by results. So by definition, they're more likely to choose what is likely to work best. And that's been really important because the localisation of different labour markets, I think, has become more significant, more pronounced over the last 10 years. And also just the fact that the world changes so quickly. The average person now has 11 different jobs in their career. In my constituency, we've got a particularly strong labour market in the area of cyber security and cyber skills, and they've got an insatiable appetite for the sort of 16 and 17-year-old teenagers who are really good at hacking in their bedroom. So, this is not a market that existed a while ago. So the labour market is changing hugely, and the labour market is very localised. So that's why I think it's so important that the work programme is done in terms of local contract packages. I'm sure we're going to be hearing more about the impact of the new enterprise allowance. This is something that we've brought back to give people encouragement to set up their own businesses. I'm sure not every one of the 300,000 new businesses that have been set up in the last 3 years came on the back of the new enterprise allowance. I think it's more like 26,000, but still that's 26,000 startups, and what an excellent way that is. So many excellent businesses came out of the new enterprise allowance schemes in the 90s. And then just finally, if I may, on the youth contract, this is, I think, one of the best kept secrets in government. It is a scheme whereby a young person, if they're hired and kept in employment for over 6 months, The employer gets paid £2,275. I haven't yet met a small business in my constituency that actually knows about this scheme, so it's, I think, one that we all need to promote much more widely, because that is quite an appealing prospect. Obviously, youth contract also includes elements of work experience, and I think this has been proven to be so effective that young people who get an experience of work and are given that opportunity to learn what the real world of work is like are the ones who seem to be succeeding in terms of moving into long-term work, and that's a crucial element of the overall package. But I've thrown out some ideas. I know there'll be lots more to say, and I hope there will be some questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Yes, we'll do store up your questions. We will come back. We'll come back for a session of questions. For the people who are standing up, we could organise probably a giant shuffle if you want to try and. There are seats dotted around, so if you want to push in, there are a couple at the front here. You're welcome to stand up, but don't feel you have to.
No, my idea to sit down and get up again. So.
Okay, yeah, no, I can't help that. Yeah.
You will do though.
Yeah. Excellent. Yep, there's two in the front row, so something very special.
Yeah, the smallest person in the room should always sit.
Yeah.
There you go, everybody from the back. I've come to the front. It's great to see you again, Stuart.
There's another one curse with two, so I appreciate the difficulty. Excellent. Well, Harriet, thank you again for that. Stuart, we're delighted to have you here as chairman of Advanta, and I know Advanta is also very active in this space. And over to you, because we really want to hear your thoughts on skills and the work programme, and particularly where you feel it's at and how it might improve. But
Okay.
thank you for being with us.
No. Well, Advanta is in the privileged position of delivering both work programme and skills, and that's not the case for all work programme providers. So it gives us both opportunity and an insight. And who could disagree with the proposition that there's a perfect match between skills and the work programme? But as usual, some of the practical details get in the way. And you know, the main emphasis of the Skills Funding Agency and BIS, which is its sort of parent, is to get people into apprenticeships. And absolutely right, because this country needs those skills going forward to achieve the prosperity that we all deserve. But unfortunately, to have an apprenticeship, you need a job. And that's why there's a disconnect, if you like, between the policy of spending a lot of money on apprenticeships and then mentioning the work programme. Because in essence, without a job, you don't have an apprenticeship. So there's a fundamental obstacle at that point. And the fact is that most work programme entrants don't necessarily have the skills to start an apprenticeship. And one of the key SFA, the Skills Funding Agency, sorry for the alphabet soup, one of their key measures is to complete an apprenticeship. So if you do not get a high percentage completion, you will start to lose your contract value. Now, couple that with the fact that you need the job. Most people from the work programme would not necessarily have the skills to start an apprenticeship. Then, basically, we know that now 30% of the jobs that are being found by the work programme are second and third jobs. That's a really key fact. I don't think anybody expected it to be that high, but I think Harriet's right, the labour market has changed, a lot of short-term jobs, a lot of zero-hours contract jobs, and therefore people will move. Now that's not consistent with high completion rates, which would then lose us the funding if we didn't get the high completion rates, if that makes sense. So the two things are incompatible. It's also a year, it's quite a long time, and it only was recently, well, I say recently, about 2 years ago, when John Hayes suddenly changed the timescale to 12 months. There's 12 months for a new entrant to a job, let alone an employer, is quite a commitment, particularly for young people. A year sounds quite a long time. And if you lose a job during that year, we will obviously find you another job, because it's the work programme and that's what we do. But you can't sign back on benefits if you're in training. We can find you another job and restart your apprenticeship if you don't claim benefits again, but if you claim benefits again, you cannot continue with your apprenticeship. So I think, in short, with the best of intentions, and this is the usual thing, with the best of intentions, there are some significant barriers to people from the work programme actually starting on an apprenticeship. However, and that's why in our case 86% of the people on our apprenticeships have been employed for more than 12 months. So it would be after they have actually left the paid for period on the work programme that they would start 86%. Very few start in less than 3 months, and 6 months is quite a small proportion as well. So it's only 14% who will start before a year. However, don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's not necessary, because it absolutely is necessary, and skills are vital for career progression. And it's quite right that we concentrate on upskilling the workforce that are in work. And basically, what we're trying to do within the work programme for most of the people is to give people back their confidence. You know, when we say that people have been 11 years unemployed, and particularly the ESA group, they've spent the last 6 to 12 months trying to convince somebody that they were too sick to work, and then all of a sudden they're on the work programme, and we're sitting there trying to convince them that they should work. It's quite a large leap, and one of the things that does help enormously is to build that confidence and motivation, establishing what people can do and their competences that can be carried forward into employment. What we call that is pre-employment training. What the Skills Funding Agency calls it is provision for the unemployed. Now, the amount of money being spent on PFU, provision for the unemployed, is very minor compared to what is being spent upon apprenticeships. I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just simply saying that's the way it is at the present time. But if the proposition is that we should be spending more on skills to get people into a job, then they can start the apprenticeships. So one must come before the other. And we're talking about essentially the confidence building, awareness of how to behave in the workplace, the 3 R's basically, the foundation learning, and that is very effective, because and it's even more effective, and I'm just delighted to be sitting next to this guy here. Actually, we're quite lookalike. We must get to the same answers, mustn't we?
You're a sweet talker.
If we couple it with a good relationship with somebody who actually thinks the work programme ought to work and puts themselves out as an employer, that's not to say that our relationship with the co-op is not a commercial relationship. They have, a sense, and our core values are much the same. It's helping people to help themselves and encouraging people to take responsibility for their own lives and their own communities. That's what we're about, that's what the co-op's about. But if it didn't work commercially, they wouldn't be doing it. And what we've now got is pre-employment training, which is that bit before you get your job, which is tailored to the co-op. So essentially they're sort of oven ready, as it were, by the time they get to the co-op, or more so. And then there's a commitment, because if we're selling a job at the co-op, then it's not just a job at the co-op, which might imply stacking shelves or being in the retail section. Co-op's a big organisation, it's got lots of departments. We serve all of those departments, and that's a growing service. And we've actually got somebody embedded in the co-op filling vacancies. Now, we've been doing that for, what, a couple of years now, Rob? And we're moving to the point where apprenticeships will start to become more relevant. But again, they'll be tailored. So what we're offering people is not a job with a co-op, but a career with a co-op. And that can be for any number of large employers in particular. It's more difficult for SMEs, and 60% of employment is still in SMEs. But with Andy, who's an immovable object when it comes to making people do things, it's basically what we're hoping to do is to take specific geographies and pull together SMEs to maybe do an employer ownership scheme, and maybe to actually aggregate training needs, and therefore be able to offer both employment and apprenticeships, perhaps in the same way as we do with a larger organisation like the co-op. Slightly more difficult. But the completion rates, I mean, are just staggering. For pre-employment training, we've got 95% completion rates for the training itself. I mean, once people get on it, and I've sat in these pre-employment training courses, they haven't got me a job yet. But it is staggering if you see the change in people who come in uninspired by looking for a job, think they can't get a job, lacking confidence. That changes around to they're going to go out and kill something and get a job, and really motivated. And so we've got something like 65, 75%, depending on various areas, into a job completion rate from pre-employment training. It does work, it is worth paying for. So, unfortunately, at the moment, BIS and SFA don't really see their raison d'etre, their main raison d'etre, and you know, we're asking them to do two things here. We've asked them to do apprenticeships and to upskill our workforce, but I think there needs to be a little bit more emphasis on getting that pre-employment skills funding into the work programme itself. So my message here is continue to spend on apprenticeship, but remember an apprenticeship requires a job, and it doesn't address unemployment in the way that pre-employment training does. And the main emphasis in skills funding at the moment is towards apprenticeship. It's not wrong, it's just saying there maybe needs to be a rebalancing. And the problem really is, sorry to say this, it's a Conservative Party conference, but it's political and it's policy and it's structural. All of which, you know, can change. And if I can quote a very eminent Conservative, Francis Moore, who said this yesterday, so fresh off the press, assertion and assumption rather than facts often drive policy. And I think that's probably true in this case. What we've got here is a sort of system which is intensely practical and needs to be intensely practical, because it's about competence. It's about learning, it's about knowledge, but it's about the application of that knowledge in a job. And that's what apprenticeships are, it's about competence. And really what I would like to see is that we get something that's a bit more incremental. As you can see, I'm pretty ancient, so I remember things like MBQs and so on. And basically, if one had an incremental system, so that you could start at level 1 or at a basic level and move through to what is now level 7 apprenticeship, which is a degree standard. At the moment, because you have to do a year, that's a 7-year cycle. You can go to university and get a degree in 3 years. We're trying to compare and contrast and make that vocational element more valuable. And I really do think that we have to start to think slightly differently in a more incremental approach, so you can get credits. And remember, if you do that, then basically what you've got is something that could start in secondary education or in UTC, and we're currently, the co-op actually have UTCs of their own, and are interested in taking skills training and vocational training back into the secondary education, and we're hoping to work with them on that. Because that's where it starts. You can actually do, it's a bit like the driving test. You do your theory test, and then you do your hazard perception test. It doesn't mean you can drive the car. Then you've got to go out with that knowledge and drive a car to the satisfaction of your assessor, and then you're a driver. And I think the other bit of this that maybe needs a rethink, and I know it's been talked about before, is you've heard of the sorcerer's apprentice. Well, once you've been an apprentice, are you the sorcerer? What are you once you've been an apprentice? My cousin was an apprentice toolmaker many years ago. He now owns his own company and is a toolmaker, and was acknowledged as a toolmaker. Now, for young people, I think we have to give them more of a destination. What will I be at the end of my apprenticeship? Will I be a doctor or a lawyer, or what will I be? And if you go back even further than MBQs, there was something called higher national certificates and higher national diplomas, and everybody knew what that meant. It was pretty much the equivalent of a degree in technical subjects. And I think maybe we need to change the nomenclature and have an incremental approach which might start over here in secondary education and move all the way through into a career and the world of work. And in that way, through pre-employment training in the work programme and other employment programmes, we're going to prevent unemployment, but also deal with unemployment and enhance the skills and the capabilities of the workforce that we all want to make Britain more prosperous. So my suggestion is a much more modularised approach and a slight rethink, or not a slight rethink, it would be a radical rethink of the way that we do things at the moment.
Thank you, Stuart, very much. And again, questions do hold questions. Rob, over to you. Tell us about co-op. Obviously, you're working with Avanta, but over to you.
Thanks, Christian. Hello, everybody. I'm
One
Rob
of the
Lebrun.
great, one of the most interesting suits, by the way, I've seen.
Oh, thank you.
I really like it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I look after all the community resourcing activity at the cooperative group, and within that falls the government's work programme. So I'm delighted to have been invited to talk today. And I was having to think about what I was going to say. The perfect match. Do I think it's the perfect match? Well, aspirationally, I think there are loads of great reasons why the work programme can work. We are 2.5 years into a journey, and touch wood, it's going pretty well for us as an organisation. But to give you some context, we are a massive beast, so we employ around about 100,000 people. I've got a business in every postcode. But since we took our initial steps on the journey 2.5 years ago, we're just about to go through the 600 placements barrier, which is fantastic, because even though we are the best company in the world and we were founded on principles such as helping communities help themselves and genuinely doing what's right for people in society, I still have to navigate a complex political internal landscape to get people bought into making things happen. And I think for me, I totally happened across the work programme by fluke. I was running a recruitment event up in Glasgow 2.5 years ago. And it just so happened that a load of these people were there from the work programme. And I thought, wow, these are all really good. Why is that? And then it turned out that they'd all been through pre-education training. So at that time I was thinking to myself, well, why don't we use it? Why don't we use it more? It's a no-brainer, surely. Pre-education training, it's cost neutral, i.e. we don't foot the bill for it. But as with any of these sort of highly political topics, you do tend to find there's a degree of, sort of people are a little bit cynical as to it's too good to be true. And I remember at the start of our journey, it was really difficult as a large employer just to try and understand and navigate the framework of primary to supplier, secondary supplier, tertiary supplier. Everybody did things differently, and it was just a complete and total nightmare. 2.5 years into our relationship with Avanta, it's getting serious now, Stuart likes to think, 2.5 years in. We're just starting to get what I would consider to be a really brilliant commercial relationship in place. and we are finding brilliant success rates, particularly through the pre-education training work that we're doing. To give you some more context, at the moment the work that we do is focused in our food business, so we operate a number of different businesses, food being our largest, and we're in the process of rolling out the work programme throughout the next year. The other important thing is to understand that the work programme is just one part of our overall community resourcing strategy, so it's really important for us to be able to support people who are long-term unemployed. Another dime bar moment that I had over the last 2.5 years, if you like, is that for us it's not just about job outcomes. So whilst obviously we are placing a lot of people through the work programme, we see a massive benefit into our local communities of people who go through the pre-education training, and that really helps them, you know, totally rebuild the self-confidence, the self-esteem. And a lot of those people won't get a job with us because obviously we don't always have enough jobs, but they will go on to stand a much better chance of getting a job with somebody else.
75% do.
So thank you, Stuart. 75% do. So you know, it's this ripple effect, which is just good karma for an employer. And I would challenge, you know, any employer or any captain of industry today, against the backdrop of shocking, you know, unemployment figures. Whilst it's getting better, there's still a lot of unemployed people. You know, what are we as employers doing to create social value, and how do we do that? And if I was to ask stuff, you know, what would the Rochdale Pioneers do? So in 1844, when we set the organisation up, it was in response to really bleak economic conditions, and there was a really tough outlook. So I think there are loads of similarities, and I'm sure that if the Rochdale Pioneers were sat on the, you know, panel today, they would be sort of saying, yeah, absolutely, the work programme just tick loads of boxes. It really helps people in communities. It helps communities, you know, get on the feet again. It really has a transformational impact on people's lives. And I've been fortunate enough to go to a lot of these pre-education academies, you know, on day one, and see the people who are in the room, and then be there on the last day when people are graduating, and it is incredible the impact that it has. And for those who can then go on and get a job, you know, bonus. If those people go on and they might be unemployed for a bit longer, but eventually go on and get a job, it has a massively transformative effect on people's lives. Within community resourcing, we're also looking at similar initiatives to work with other, what we call marginalised communities. So people who might be coming out of prison, you know, there's a huge opportunity there as captains of industry to really help people coming out of prison, to work with people who might have a learning disability or physical disability, people who are coming out of the armed forces. So my approach is to look at all these different parts of society and think, okay, so if we don't in any way support them, they could quite easily fall into these worklessness traps. So what I want to do is campaign internally to put in place the best employability scheme in the world, and, you know, in the true spirit of cooperation, encourage as many other organisations and companies to get on the bus with us, because this isn't a competition. You know, we will happily share all our learnings and all the pain that we've been through with anybody who's interested in listening, if it means that we can make a bigger impact onto worklessness in the UK and worklessness on the global stage by just sharing ideas. Because it is really tough. It's really difficult to get people to buy into this kind of work. And I feel like I'm having to campaign and lobby people internally all the time, just to make things happen, and to melt away the barriers about, oh God, you know, what's it like to recruit somebody who's long-term unemployed, and there's a reason they're long-term unemployed, or what's it like to recruit from this community, that community. So it's not an easy ride, and I would imagine some people have the perception of the cooperative being, you know, we're right on and we're really progressive in that way, but the operational reality of it is really tough. For me, working with an organisation like Avanta has been absolutely invaluable. I have an amazing relationship with the team, and the team have enabled us to deliver what we've delivered, and will continue to enable us to deliver great things into our organisation over the next 3 to 5 years. So I think the relationship with the work programme provider is really key, and that enables you to have a much better dialogue with the work programme and with government. And, you know, I don't think it is the perfect match, if I'm being honest. I think there's still loads and loads of things that we need to think through, but it's about having that meaningful dialogue, and it's a two-way dialogue. So for us, it's about sometimes challenging the work programme and saying this isn't working for us, we need to be thinking differently, or maybe talking to the education department in Whitehall and just sort of saying, look, come on guys, what do we need to be doing here differently. Because I think the youth unemployment challenge is going to be the biggest one. That's the one which I think is the biggest opportunity, looking at this generation of young people. And as a country, I do really worry that we are almost sleepwalking into a real crisis. So for me, if there is anything that I can do as the community resourcing manager to lobby and rally other captains of industry to stand united and to work cooperatively to make sure that there is a really close relationship between skills and the future success of UK PLC, then you've got my number, give me a ring, and I'd love to share our ideas and successes.
Excellent, thank you very much. Loads of good stuff there. In a second I'll take questions, but just one from me, I suppose, to each of you to start the discussion. Harriet, you talked about perhaps the youth contract being the best kept secret in...
I was going to ask Rob if you'd heard of it.
Yes,
Okay,
we have.
good.
But I think this is another really great example of something which people in our organisation were like, oh, youth contract. And I was like, well, why? Basically, it's for a big employer, the massive consideration is all about reputational risk. Some employers, I think, have fallen foul of where they've been seen to be drawing down all this money and then using it perhaps in not the most well thought through way. Whereby what we want to do, our aspiration is to draw down this funding, unashamedly, but then reinvest that funding back into regionalised initiatives which will help develop employability skills of people around the country. So, hello, all employers should be doing that. It's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, so the question I'd have is, how do we raise that awareness? And sort of what do you think government will do in the next couple of years? Do you think there'll be a second wind to the youth contract, or with the election looming, do you think other priorities will emerge? In terms of Stuart, it'd be interesting to know from you, I think I asked this last week at Labour conference in Baldwin, what's the one thing you think government could do to improve the work programme from where you are sitting? And then, Rob, you've obviously got a huge amount of passion for the work programme, which is really exciting, but I don't mean this to be funny, but you don't hear a lot of it publicly. The work programme has got a strange brand now, and I think a lot of good that happens on the work programme never really emerges. So you kind of stop in your tracks when you hear someone talking really passionately about it who's not in government. How do you think we can cut through the bad press that the work programme has had and take the message out to others, perhaps people who are sceptical, thinking of journalists and perhaps the Labour Party, who I'm sure attempted to come and just scrap the thing. How do you rescue the brand? Harriet,
Do you want to start with me?
Yeah.
I think that tackling youth unemployment has got to be one of the absolutely central and most important missions of what we're doing. And I think that the work programme, which has now just completed its full 2 years, it does seem to be with young people that that's been one of the most successful categories, and a lot of that will be because the work programme providers, they do know about the youth contract. But I think one of the things that I'm not entirely convinced our work programme providers have got their heads around, and I'd be interested in hearing Stuart's feedback on this, is that every recovery in every country, every period in history has come through small businesses hiring. And if you're a work programme provider, it's obviously much better if you can work with a large employer like the Co-op and not find those small businesses that are going to want to hire on one person, because that's going to be quite a lot of energy and effort. And actually it probably is those smaller micro businesses that are going to hire that extra person, that young person perhaps that's been out of work, who doesn't know about the youth contract. And so I'd be really interested in hearing suggestions from this very erudite group this morning on how we can make sure that more of the smaller businesses know about both the work programme, the youth contract, and indeed apprenticeships, because I think actually for a small business, some of the bureaucracy that comes around creating that apprenticeship is pretty terrifying, and I've held the hand of many a small business in my constituency doing that, but and they've said actually it wasn't as bad as we feared, but they are quite worried about it. So I think that small versus big business issue is an important one. But I completely believe that although youth unemployment is now down below where it was 3 years ago, and I think it's not often reported in the media that 300,000 of the people are full-time students in that 968,000 number. It's still a crucial part of what we want to achieve, is that every young person either goes on to university, into apprenticeships, or into employment, and none of this very damaging gap between
Or all of
either of
those.
those things. Well, possibly all of them. Actually, there I would pick you up, actually, because I would say that an apprenticeship, the funding that's there, and perhaps some of the reason why the barriers you're experiencing are there, is the apprenticeship is really there for the young person who's not going to university. That's kind of how we all think of apprenticeships, isn't it? It's not necessarily for the person who is more mature, out of the labour market, has been through university, although there will be people that go through it. But I think that may be why you're finding that the two systems don't work terribly much effectively together. But
I'm not going to agree with that.
having nothing to do at all with the Department of Education, I can safely say that.
I mean, as ambassador, I can confirm that is exactly what an apprenticeship is. That is the categorisation of apprenticeship. It's training somebody into a job. So.
Well, unfortunately, it's not funded as training somebody into
No,
a
but
job.
it's employer-led funding. I was going to ask a question.
No.
It's there for an employer to train somebody into a job. That's what we do with our apprenticeship. We train them to carry out a skill, which then they can take to
Of
market.
course.
Yeah, but it is a specific, the qualification is in a specific area rather than a broad skill. And the minimum is 12 months, but you can do a level 3 in 12 months. You just have to do a minimum of 12 months in an apprenticeship. It doesn't matter if you put any level at that rate.
So I go back to my primary point and the work programme. The proposition is, and my proposition is, a seamless journey from secondary education, hopefully not through unemployment, into employment, with an appropriate, if you like, set of credits adding up to something like a primary, intermediate and a higher level qualification. When I say, are you the sorcerer at the end of your apprenticeship, I'm not sure we've named that sufficiently for young people to say, I am a X or Y or Z. And a lot of them do have not necessarily rational expectations of their progress through a career. So I'm not sure it's that apprenticeships are, the implication is, and from the past, young people went into apprenticeships and then became, like my cousin, a tool maker or something else. It would appear to be aimed at youngsters, but there's a lot of people who are over 24 who still need skills and upskilling into jobs that, remember from the work programme, are largely entry-level jobs. And therefore, you do need other skills to, and I'm not saying this right, so...
I'm just going back to the points that Harriet made earlier, that people will have 11 different jobs in their career, and actually you might change that job at 40, you might change that job at 45, and you might need an apprenticeship programme or some form of training to manage that transition from one job to another.
Training, definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
But
some
it's not
form.
necessarily what we think of as an apprenticeship.
That's the method that we are now funded, is through apprenticeship programmes. And I was on the panel last week at Labour, and I asked the question, is this a public sector problem or is it a private sector problem? Given that the government spends 4 or 5 billion a year on funding, and the private sector last year spent 49.6 billion on training, and actually the view was, the consensus was, that actually the government should stimulate and use their money to stimulate. And Stuart's point before, sorry, I'm jumping in here.
Oh, my questions have gone out the window. This is much more funding this though, this is much better. So.
Stuart highlighted in his talk about Avanti using pre-employment training to mobilise a cohort of people into employment who are not at a certain skill level. We've had great success, 70% plus. The issue is, for government as I see it, is the return on investment. Because the industry average is 18.6%. But yet the government continues to support and back providers who are delivering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% return on investment, as opposed to organisations who are continually trying to fight for funding to continue to do the work they're doing.
Thanks, Andy. Going back to the youth contract, it's great, work experience and so on, but without carping, it's another initiative. So what we are left doing a lot of the time, it's like the traineeships, it's another initiative. So providers are left trying to join funding streams, in some cases from different departments, to achieve a total journey for a candidate from education or a young person or an adult. And that's what we spend our lives doing. And we work with employers, as it were, to hide the wiring, particularly SMEs, because it is, it can be a bit daunting when you get the paperwork. So we hide the wiring for them. But the youth contract is a great thing, but I'd like less initiatives and more a thought-through continuum.
Okay, good. Okay, I think it's a good time to open up. We've only got less than 10 minutes now, so questions. I'm going to take a couple from the back here, so gentleman, lady here, and I'll come back to these next two.
Thank you. Steve Brown, I chair the Big Issue Foundation, and many of you, I'm sure, will see our vendors. In many ways, sorry, can you hear me anyway?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I can shout.
Give us a song.
Many of you probably not aware, we do a lot of work with long-term unemployed, and I'd like to ask both Rob and Stuart, particularly it's about communication and self-esteem. When you have three generations of long-term unemployed, having skills, having knowledge is great, but they lack self-esteem, and they actually lack the ability to communicate because they're going themselves. So I'd like to understand how that is measured within the work programme and what value that's given, because that takes a lot of time to actually engage and actually move people on.
Okay, good question. And the lady here.
Yeah, my name's Sian Morgan, I work for London First. I'm a bit of a layman when it comes to this, so excuse me if I'm forgetting something, but just drawing a few of your strands together. Harriet, you were talking about how there's more of a localisation of skills on workforces now, and how local employers have got local skills that they need from their community, and they want to employ young people with those specific skills. And Stuart, you touched on this as well, but it seems that quite a lot of these initiatives are reactive rather than proactive. And are we missing an opportunity to be working with young people at a much earlier age when they're in schools, and local businesses being able to engage with young people whilst they're at school and help build their skills and their confidence and everything else that we've been talking about at a much earlier age?
Okay, if one or two could pick up on both of those questions. I know the first question was maybe from Steve and Rob.
You want to go?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely, completely, totally right in asking that question. And as I said earlier on, for me, the most satisfying bit of the relationship with the work programme is seeing how it can really help transform people's self-esteem. One of the challenges that I've had as a large employer is to change the mindset of the recruiting managers, because by the very nature of the people who they are going to be interviewing, they're coming from a totally different section of society. So for me, we're a customer service business, obviously, so we have to always recruit people who are going to provide the best type of service for our customers. But we do have to take our hiring manager community on a bit of a journey to help people understand that, in my experience, you've got to recruit people more in a mindset than you have on a skill set. And I think that's the easiest way to articulate it here, because we've got to give people a chance. We've got to give people a second chance in a lot of instances. But I can honestly, hand on heart, say that in every instance that we do that, we see the levels of engagement amongst colleagues in stores go through the roof. We see customer satisfaction surveys in the stores where these people work go through the roof. We see staff retention go through the roof. So, we're building a real body of evidence to say that there are so many softer benefits as well as the real hard commercial benefits associated to this. But it is tough. It's tough to get people in the business to change their mindset, because they will look at somebody who's come for a job interview, and even down to things like how we assess those people, making reasonable adjustments to the assessment process. Because if you've been out of work for 2 or 3 years and then you're in an interview, it's like the most terrifying thing you could ever imagine in your entire life. And even if you've been through a 2-week pre-education training academy, and in that environment where you're with a load of people that you've built a relationship with, and you're like, woo! As soon as you get into that room, most people just completely crumble. So we're absolutely working on that, and it's part of our strategy, our internal comm strategy, to really land that message.
I mean, and because Rob and some of his colleagues will come into our pre-employment training courses, we can take some of those people through that journey. But self-esteem, that confidence, finding what you can do as opposed to what you can't do, or what people have been telling you can't do, is the first part of the journey through that pre-employment. You know, turning up at 9 o'clock in the morning and going home at 4 is a bit strange if you're from 3 generations of unemployed people who get up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's about creating routines, it's about creating confidence in yourself, and being able to have an employer in those situations is just fantastic, because actually there is a destination at the end of it. Now, for people who don't have a co-op destination or another destination, nevertheless, the change in 10 days is it's just remarkable. So I think, you know, from that point of view, pre-employment training, if it does nothing else, it gives people back that self-confidence and esteem, as well as workplace skills, workplace orientation, maybe some 3 R's, some basic skills. So all of those fit them much better. It doesn't stop them freezing in an interview.
I'm just gonna,
You know, you have to go.
Okay, just want to get through these. So Harriet, if you want to come on to
Well,
the
just this
excellent
is my
question
biggest takeaway from this session, is that can I invite myself on this pre-employment training course?
Absolutely.
It sounds like a fantastically successful one. The results sound outstanding. I'd be very interested in looking at how that can be evaluated against other performers, and you know, if it is doing so much better, you know, why not have it, as you say, in schools, you know, and it is a perennial problem that gets raised about how we can improve, you know, what often are quite good links between businesses and schools in every local community, but I think they always can be better, and maybe it can all be worked in through something along these lines, it's a, I think the biggest takeaway is this excellent course, which sounds
Well, we're not finished
really
yet though,
good.
another few minutes, we have a big one. Right, I think there were, I'm going to take the lady here, and then I'm going to take the 2 who were up last time. I think it was the lady here and the gentleman there. If we get through these really quickly, we're going to be out in a few minutes. But I'm sorry for those who haven't been able to ask a question.
Hi, I'm Lindsay, I'm from the Prince's Trust. We've got some concerns about young people setting up businesses under universal credit. We think setting up a business is a great route out of unemployment for a lot of young people. We think the 1-year start-up period under universal credit is a bit restrictive, so I was interested if there's any movement on that.
Okay. Gentleman there will come.
Hi, I'm Simon Parkinson from Royal Mencat Society, the charity for people with learning disabilities. Just want to start with a very quick acknowledgement to Rob and the cooperative group. They raised £7 million for us 2 years ago as their charity of the year. We use that to inspire and build the confidence of young people with learning disabilities, so that, you know, when they are, you know, of working age, that they've maybe more skills. What they also did though was open up over 100 vacancies to people with learning disabilities as well, over a longer period than
Can
the
I just push you
relationship
for the
with
question?
Quanta.
It is brilliant.
There is a
Just
point.
get to the question. Yeah, thank you.
The way we do that now as Mencap is through Work Choices, which is the government's specialist disability employment programme. It's a question to Harriet. That's due to be recommissioned in 2015. Can you talk about what your thinking is on how Work Choices and Work Programme will work together?
And then the lady here. If you want, you can just shout into the microphone here.
Thank you.
Miriam Shaughnessy. I work with part of my job is to work with the energy and utility sector, and we've just had an EOS award, and part of that is going to be inclusion apprenticeships around people come from disadvantaged groups, offenders, etc. Harry, could we have a conversation about to see how we can work it all together, and obviously to share some best practice with Rob as well, to see how we can share.
Okay, brilliant. Over to you.
Well, I certainly think ex-offenders and it being a very specialist area, and it has come up a couple of times today. What I found in being a West Mercia MP is that you can find that your provider is quite a long way away. So it's, I think, an area that we've got to improve in terms of making sure that ex-offenders immediately get some extra support. So I'd be very interested in hearing more about this. On the Work Choices and Mencap, I don't know is the answer, the quick answer to that one, but I will ask Esther, and if you give me your card, I'll get her to reply to you afterwards. And on the Prince's Trust, what the question about self-employment. What this is referring to is that under universal credit you get a year, and then after a year they assume that you're by then making the minimum wage for, I think is it 37 hours a week or something, I'm not sure exactly, 35 hours a week. And that, you know, if you haven't got to there by a year, that you know, maybe this startup's never going to really succeed, and is the state just subsidising your lifestyle choice to run this startup? And I think that my honest answer to this, I think this is something that needs to, and I think this is what I think I'm on message here with David Freud, is that it's something that will be kept under review, and that what we want to do is encourage people to start up their businesses, but at the same time we don't want them to carry on with a business that's never really going to provide them with a living and allow the state to
We
subsidise
understand that.
lifestyle.
We've got a lot of evidence that a year is too short. And a lot of
Okay,
business-
yeah, you've made the point really well.
It's I can't let an occasion pass without mentioning self-employment. As you know, Avanta is absolutely solidly behind it. To providing 65% of DWP's outcomes on the New Deal for self-employment. So 6,000 new businesses later since the work programme started. We can't get access to the same facilities as NEA offers, because it's not applicable to work programme. And whilst it's good to have NEA, what I would argue is that, you know, for the very difficult people that we've got, it's insufficient. It's I've written papers on it, and basically we've got this wrong way round. You know, we need mentors when they've started their business, not before their businesses. It's a great way of starting your businesses, but we need some of that back into the work programme, because there are a lot of people in the work programme who will start a new business and do not have the support. Well, they have support in Avanta, but it's not universal throughout all work programme providers, and certainly support NEA gives in terms of loans and so on. And we, by the way, have the same concerns over a year, and David Freud's got copious. Yes, you were.
It does sound like it needs.
But it does need to be kept under review as opposed to be forgotten, because it could actually stop it
I'm
there.
confident it will not be forgotten.
Right. I'm sorry about time getting ahead of us, but I think you identified some really important points there about how we could review things and improve the setup, but also a lot of good that's already underway, and it's been excellent to hear about some of what Rob's doing and supporting great causes like MakeUp. So thanks for your time as a panel, thanks for being with us at this lunchtime, and if you just show your appreciation as they finish, move on.